Thank you. If you think you're getting more robocalls than ever, you're probably right. Just this past month, a record 2.6 billion robocalls flooded our cell phones, work phones, and home phones. And these calls are more than just a nuisance. They can add up to harassment or even outright fraud. When Congress first passed the Telephone Consumer Protection Act 25 years ago, we stated that consumers were already, quote, outraged over the proliferation of intrusive nuisance calls to their homes. Back then, we sought to balance individual privacy rights, public safety interests, and commercial freedoms of speech and trade, and for a time, the law worked. Unfortunately, a little over a decade later, these nuisance calls were on the rise again, but this time the calls did not only cause a nuisance, many of them sought to defraud consumers. According to the FTC, consumer complaints of unwanted telemarketing calls increased over 1,000% between 1998 and 2002. Congress stepped in once more to stop this dramatic surge in calls, and we required the FTC to create a do-not-call registry, among other things, again turning back the tide of unwanted calls. But almost like clockwork, however, nuisance calls were rebounding again nearly a decade later. Robocallers were finding new ways to circumvent the system, and the law simply wasn't keeping up. The FCC tried to reduce these robocalls, but they keep coming. By 2012, the FCC was receiving an average of over 10,000 complaints per month from mobile phones alone, and that number has only continued to grow to a point where last year the FCC received more than 170,000 robocall and telemarketing complaints. So last month, the FCC convened a new robocall strike force, hoping to leverage the industry in the FCC's ongoing effort, and I commend the Commission for working so diligently to address this issue, but the fact that the FCC's actions are not reducing the number of robocalls demonstrates that it's time for Congress to once again step in. So I urge the strike force to continue to look for technical and regulatory solutions to this problem, but Congress has a role as well. So that's why I joined Ranking Member Eshoo and Schakowsky last month in asking that the committee hold a hearing on updating the TCPA. Our constituents are rightfully growing impatient with these calls, and they expect us to fix the problem. And I appreciate that Chairman Walden agreed to our request for this hearing, and also want to thank the phone carriers for offering to work with us to carry or to address this problem. It's not a moment too soon, and we all need to work together to solve it. Now, we acted to protect consumers in 91 and 2003. Now, 13 years later, we should again put the FTC and the FCC back on firm footing so they can step up to protect consumers from these annoying and so often dangerous calls. Again, I want to thank our witnesses, and I yield the balance of my time to Ms. Schakowsky.